Hey everyone, it's Allie and welcome to my channel, and today I am super excited to talk with you about all the books I've read during the first quarter of the year. Alright my friends, I feel like it has been a while since I filmed a video. April has been a very chaotic month. It's been a lot of fun, but I am excited to get back on my YouTube grind and also my reading grind. I did read a lot though, the first 3 months of the year. April not so much, but that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about January, February, and March. This is going to be probably a little bit of a long video, so I've got a beverage, little spearmint tea action in my professional bookworm mug. But the first book that I read was The Phoenix Crown by Kate Quinn and Janie Chang. This I think was actually on my December TBR list and I just didn't get around to it, so it did end up being the first book of the year for me. I was really excited about this one. This was one of my most highly anticipated releases from last year. I believe I did end up getting this from Book Outlet, so it might still be available there. I had only read one other book by Kate Quinn. I had never read anything by Janie Chang, but I loved that book by Kate Quinn, even though I can't remember the name of it right now. I'll add it up here. And the blurb on the back definitely got me interested in this one. So it's set in San Francisco in 1906, and I feel like I just haven't read many books set during that time, and definitely not in San Francisco. So we're following two different women from two different walks of life, which I also think is really interesting and is a common theme in a lot of historical fiction. But unfortunately, I just found this a little bit boring. I was highly expecting to give this like 4.5, 5 stars. I ended up giving this 3.75, which is a bit low for me. I feel like a lot of books end up getting between 4 and 4.5, and if they're really good, between 4.5 and 5. But I said I was struggling with the first couple hundred pages, which is quite a lot of time to struggle with a book, but I did really enjoy the last third. It was a decent read, but it didn't really catch my interest. I think a big problem for me with this was that I just personally didn't like the main characters very much, and there wasn't as much action as I was expecting, because on the back it really emphasizes this devastating earthquake, but that doesn't happen until pretty deep into the book. So if you like Kate Quinn or Janie Chang, I would definitely still read this. Just for me, it did not stand out as a top historical fiction. Okay, then I did read a thriller, and that is The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. And I gotta say, I don't remember a lot about this book. Okay, so it is set at a camp, which I really love. That is absolutely one of my favorite subgenres for thrillers. That setting, I think, is just so fun because you can picture it so easily. It's nostalgic for a lot of us. Feels very 90s to me for some reason, I guess because I was a kid in the 90s. But in this book, we're having the classic thriller setup of a troubled upper 20s, young 30s, can't remember exact age for this main character, but her in her present day, she's kind of struggling a little bit, and then we're flashing back to her experiences at camp when she was younger. And some of the main characters' friends went missing when she was at camp. So through the flashbacks, we're finding out a little bit more information about what happened, which I do think is really enjoyable. I did not see the ending coming personally, but overall, I think for me, it was a little bit too much of a slow burn. Not a lot of action throughout the whole story, but then at the end, it does all come together. So for me, this was somewhere between 4.25. I'll probably read everything Riley Sager has ever put out, will ever put out, but this was kind of mid-range for me from him. Okay, next we had another thrillerish type book. This is Five Total Strangers by Natalie Richards. I got this from Book Outlet, just kind of caught my eye on there. So in this story, the main character, Mira, she needs to get home for the holidays, but an incoming blizzard has resulted in her flight getting canceled. So Mira's in Philadelphia, she doesn't know anyone around there, and like the silly main character in a thriller that she is, she decides to get in a car with strangers. So the book is following Mira and 4 other people who apparently don't know each other. They're in a car and they are trying to get to their end destination. And not surprisingly, in this thriller, bad stuff starts happening and it continues to happen as the trip goes on. So things are happening amongst the characters, but then also the weather is really bad. So I did like that aspect. I did like the isolation of them in the car together. I did like the trials they were facing with the weather. But with this one, I did find it a little bit boring. And then the ending, I was expecting a big shock, and it was a little bit obvious, I thought. And I'm not someone who predicts a lot of thriller endings or tries to predict the endings. But yeah, I was just not super impressed by this. So I think it is a very atmospheric read if you are looking for a very wintry, thriller-ish type of book. I think this will be a good fit, but I would not expect this to knock your socks off by any means. And this ended up getting a 3.5 from me, and just for reference, for my personal rating scale, I really don't give anything lower than a 3. Okay, but I swear I did read a lot of good books over these 3 months, and this is one of them. This was actually a reread for me. This is The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane by Kate DiCamillo. I feel like that came out weird. But I read this a ton when I was younger. I actually did end up rebuying it from the thrift store, still has that sticker on there. But Kate DiCamillo is a fabulous middle grade author. I personally would love to be a middle grade author myself, and I very much look up to her because she writes a great story that is entertaining for people of all ages, I think. But of course it is appropriate for the middle grade audience. And this is just the sweetest story. This is absolutely one of my favorites from her. And if you are someone who just loves toys, if you feel very sentimental towards your toys, your stuffed animals, your dolls, this will absolutely make you cry. Kind of like Toy Story vibes a little bit. So our main character is Edward Tulane, and he is this large china rabbit doll, and the book follows his adventures as he goes from owner to owner. It's a pretty quick read. Like I said, I think people of all ages, all genders, all interests really would like this. It's just such a touching story. 5 stars. All I said in my review was, I love this book, crying face. Next up, we have another top read, another standout read, one that I'm still thinking about, and that is The Whalebone Theater by Joanna Quinn. First off, I love this cover, and this is a read with Jenna book pick. I loved everything about this book. My review just said so excellent with like 15 O's and many, many exclamation marks. So this is a saga. We are following the main characters across many years. We're starting off in 1928 when a whale washes up on the shores of the English Channel, and 12-year-old orphan Christabel Seagrave is one of the main characters, and she very much reminded me of the main character in Atonement. Kind of the same, like, feisty, mature in some ways but very immature in other ways type of female main character, and I really liked just the author's storytelling in general, but I really liked the inner dialogue of Christabel when she was a kid. Very precocious, I guess is the right word. But we're following Christabel, her brother Digby, and her sister Flossie throughout their lives, and Christabel and Digby end up being secret agents in World War II, so there's just a lot of interesting stuff going on. If you like historical fiction, if you like a saga, I think if you did like Atonement, this is a good one to check out. Next, we've got a very thick read. We have Robert Galbraith's The Ink Black Heart. So this is, I think, number 6 in the Cormoran Strike series. So each book in the series, just like a typical detective series, we're following the same 2 main characters, the detective Cormoran Strike and his assistant Robin, and each book is a different case. And of course, we're also following the relationship of the detective and his partner throughout the stories as well. So I really like that aspect of this whole series. I feel like it's a perfect balance of following the crime, but then also getting so invested in these characters because each book is really thick. So I've just eaten this series up. I've enjoyed it so much. Some I like more than others just because of the specific crimes, but this one was absolutely a top favorite, maybe like a top 2 in the whole series for me so far. This one I thought was especially interesting because a lot of it takes place online, and so there's like screenshots of an online chat room. So I like stories like that where you're reading like the normal narrative, but then there's other types of storytelling as well. So internet chat room or newspapers just adds a little bit of interest, especially when the book is so thick. And the main characters are trying to find the true identity of a person on a game who has been causing a lot of problem. There are some deaths that happen throughout the story. So I just felt like this one was really, really interesting. It's like 1,000 pages, and I think I read this in 2 to 3 days. So very fun. And even though it actually was not the next book that I read, I will just piggyback on that with the next book in the series, which is The Running Grave. So with me finishing this book, I'm now all caught up in the series. The next book is coming out in September, so I am really, really excited for that. A lot of the books in this series are pretty graphic, kind of hard to read in different ways, I guess, depending on what you're sensitive to. So just be aware of that. Maybe look up some trigger warnings for certain books. This one for me personally was the hardest to read because of the subject matter. It's a very interesting concept, but it does get very intense. So the assistant Robin infiltrates a cult. So she goes into this cult setting and she's undercover. So of course she cannot reveal who she is. So she just has to go along with all the cult practices. And there are some things that happen that were very uncomfortable to read. So just be aware of that going into this one. But even though this was not my favorite story overall, every book in this series is so well written. I feel like they're all so engaging. And I do end up reading them all very quickly for 1,000-page books. So that one I think I did end up giving 4.5, but overall the series has been 5 stars for me. Let's backtrack one. This is the book that I read in the middle, and that is Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. So I had initially picked out Six of Crows during my January TBR, I think, but a lot of you guys said that I should read Shadow and Bone before Six of Crows. So there's 3 books in this series. It's a trilogy, and then Six of Crows is a duology. Same world, but yeah, people recommend reading this series first, just FYI. But I was for sure impressed with this story. I kind of wish I would have just cranked out the whole trilogy because these are pretty quick reads. The main character, Alina Starkov, is a soldier who knows she may not survive her first trek across the Shadow Fold, but her regiment ends up being attacked and she releases this dormant magic that she didn't even know she had. So she's kind of a lowly person at the beginning, and then everyone becomes very impressed by her. So she does a little bit of training, which is fun, and there's a little bit of a love triangle situation going on. But because this is a pretty short book, the chapters are quite short, it reads very quickly, there's a lot of action going on. So I am very excited to continue this series. I probably will try to read the other 2 books quite soon, just so I don't forget everything that happened in the first one. And I did end up giving this 5 stars overall. I don't think it's a new top favorite book for me, but for what it is, I think it's very, very strong. Then I did read another thriller, Only If You're Lucky by Stacey Willingham. I was going to go to this local book festival. I didn't end up going, but I wanted to read this book before I thought I was going to go because Stacey Willingham was there because she is a Charleston native. So that's the main reason that I did read this, but I have read her other 2 books, A Flicker in the Dark and All the Dangerous Things, and I thought they were solid. She's not like a top favorite author for me in the genre, but I do think her books are worth reading and I'll always be on the lookout for them. This one out of the 3 that are out by Willingham was unfortunately my least favorite, and I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. I said I found it pretty boring until the last 100 pages or so, although I did like that there are a few twists that I didn't see coming. Gave Mean Girls in college vibes for sure, but I just felt like it didn't even feel like a strong thriller until the very end. Throughout the story, we're following this character, Margot, and she's kind of just like the classic shy girl, very much Katie in Mean Girls. And then the very popular girl, aka Regina, she sees Margot and she invites her to live with her and her 2 other friends. And they live together for a year, and then the Regina type character, Lucy, goes missing without a trace. So there's a little bit of back and forth in time, but for the most part you are following the characters throughout the year. And it was fine, but it just wasn't as action-packed as I would hope for a thriller. Then I did read a nonfiction book, one that had been on my bookshelf for a while that I had kept wanting to get to. I finally read it, and that is The Wager, A Tale of Shipwreck, Mutiny, and Murder by David Grann. This book absolutely reads like a novel, and it's kind of unsettling when you read it and you're like, oh, this is interesting, and then you're like, wait, this happened, that kind of sucks. Because as the title suggests, there is a boat that wrecks, there's mutiny, and there's murder, and it's very interesting because the author is just like, I don't really know exactly what happened. No one can say for sure. All we know is what the people said at the time, what they wrote. So there were 2 different camps of people who did end up making it back to England after they were wrecked on an island. And they both had a little bit different stories to tell, but it's just absolutely crazy what they had to go through, how they ended up making it back. And I think this is a very approachable nonfiction book just because I think the subject matter would be interesting to a lot of people. And it's also not super thick, but I would highly recommend this, and I am extremely excited to read more from David Grann. They're making that into a movie, I think, at some point, and it would be an excellent movie. Next up, I did read A Killing Cold. This one I just really wanted to get in during the winter months because of the vibes of the story. This is a story where the characters are isolated in a cabin, which I did really enjoy. The main character, Theodora Scott, is engaged to Connor, who's part of a very wealthy and charming family, and this is the first time that Theodora is meeting the family. It was a very quick quick engagement. And Theodora, while she's there, is getting messages to stay away from her fiance. Bad stuff starts happening. There's like this whole motley crew of the family. There's like the uncle, the grandma, the mom. So all those characters I think are fun in a thriller. Kind of a little bit like Knives Out type vibe. So I did enjoy this. I don't think it will stick out to me over time, but I did end up giving this 4 stars. Very good one to read in winter, I would say. Now we have probably the book that I'm still thinking about the most. I loved this book, and that is The Bee Sting by Paul Murray. So this is a saga. You might be able to tell it's quite thick. I love a saga. I love following a character or a series of characters throughout their lives, and I am just really loving good literary fiction lately. So we're following kind of a normal looking nuclear family, and then there are also flashbacks to the parents when they were younger. So there's like different parts of the story, and they're all quite in depth, which is why the book is thick. So my major qualm with this, I would say, is that I just thought certain parts were a little bit too long, because it is almost 700 pages. Maybe it should have been more like 550 to 600, but I don't mind a long book, so I still did really enjoy it. And the ending is wild. I just can't even say anything more than that, but if you've read this, you know, it was one of those ones where you read the last word and then you're like, wait, there's no more. But it all connects. I think it's very cleverly written, and I'm so excited to read more from Paul Murray. But yeah, if you like a saga, if you like being nosy about the inner workings of family and family members' secrets, I think you'll really enjoy this. And I did like the writing style. The author wrote each person's inner dialogue in a different way, which was kind of hard to read for some of them, but I do really respect that, and I think it just made the story that much more engaging. Now we have, unfortunately, one of my least favorite books that I read, and that was T. Kingfisher's A House with Good Bones. And this was the first book that I did read from this author, and I've seen so many people say such positive things, so I was going in with a little bit of high expectations, and I'll absolutely give the author another chance because I didn't mind the writing style or anything like that, but I found the first 3/4 a little bit boring, and then the last part, which is where the horror really comes out, because this is a horror type of book, I found that just so absurd that I just was like, nah, not for me. So in this story, the main character, who I think is maybe like early 30s, she goes back home to live with her mom for a little bit, and she notices that her mom is acting really weird. Strange stuff starts happening with the house. So I thought I would really like this story because of that. I do like a thriller horror that's kind of centered around the house. But I did find this a little bit boring, unfortunately. Like I said, I know a lot of people do like this author. A lot of people did like this book, so it might just not have been for me. You might love it, but I do want to give this author another try, so do let me know if there's another one that you really like by her. And ultimately, that did get 3 stars from me. That's like the lowest I do give out. Next, we had another book that I was really looking forward to reading, and it was just a slight letdown, I would say, and that is A Short Walk Through a Wide World. So what's funny is I did end up reading Addie LaRue later, so I'll talk about that in a little bit. But once I finished that book, I thought, this book feels like that, but just not quite as good. So this book starts out in Paris, 1885, and the main character, Aubrey, she starts bleeding terribly, like she's gonna die, and she realizes that the only way to make it stop is for her to be on the move. So from that point on, she just starts traveling the world, and she can never stop moving. She can only stay in one place for like a couple days. So I did like the concept, and I did like certain parts of the story. I think it was a little bit too all over the place for me, but ultimately it was a fun read if you like a fantastical type of story. I would recommend checking it out, but it wasn't like my new favorite book by any means. And I did end up giving it 3.75 stars. And next up, I did read another nonfiction book, and that is Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance. And I had wanted to read this book for a long time, long before he got into politics, and I would really try to put politics aside and not let that taint your view of this book, because at its core, it is, I think, a very interesting sociological study of like hillbilly culture and how that affects future generations and just how they look at the world. So JD spent a lot of time in Kentucky and then like rural Ohio for most of his childhood, which I did find interesting because that's not terribly far from where I grew up in Columbus. So I could definitely picture the towns he was talking about, picture that atmosphere. And I just thought it was really interesting. I am a big lover of sociology and psychology, so if you also like that, I would recommend checking it out. I feel like it's hard to rate a memoir, but overall it was a solid 4 stars for me. Then I finally read a book that my husband has been wanting me to read for a long time, and that is Red Rising, which is the first book in the Red Rising series. I don't know what it's actually called. And I really did not know what to expect from this, but I really, really loved it. But it is quite brutal, so just kind of know that going into it if you haven't read it yet. So it is a sci-fi type of book, takes place in the future, and the main character, Darrow, is kind of a slave type of person. And I don't want to reveal too much, but he ends up infiltrating the highest class, I would say. And I liked it because it's a little bit of an academy setting, but it's also like a competition. It felt very Hunger Games vibes to me. Ryan did say that the other books in the series are pretty different. It's not like every book is basically the same. So he said I might not like the other ones as well, but overall this one was 5 stars for me. But just make sure you know that there is a lot of killing, a lot of brutality in this book, and I think that continues on in the rest of the series. Okay, and now we can talk about The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, which I had been putting off reading for a really long time, I think just because there's so much hype around the book, so many people love this book, that I don't know, I wanted it to still be on the horizon. I still wanted to have it to read. I did give it 4.5 stars, and I said I would say it lived up to the hype. Always enjoy some magical realism, one of my favorite fantasy subgenres. So this book, if by chance you have not read it, even though I feel like everyone has, we're following the main character, Addie LaRue, and in 1714, she basically makes a bargain with the devil. She gets to live forever, but in return, she's cursed to be forgotten by everyone she meets. So the main portion of the story is set in basically present day, and my big qualm with the story was that I wish there was more flashbacks to her experiences before that. There were short little scenes, but I would have liked to see her more throughout history, and in the core part of the story, there's a little bit more romance than I would personally prefer, but I did really like it overall. If I am going to read anything that's romance, I feel like I need a lot of fantasy, I need a lot of historical fiction, so I think a lot of different people would enjoy this story. As I said, I do think it lives up to the hype, just not a top favorite for me. Okay, 3 more, and next up we have The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, another one that I've been staring at on my shelf for a long time. I feel like so many people have read this and really enjoyed it, and this was another saga type of story, and the topic is very interesting, very thought-provoking. So we're following 2 twins throughout their lives, a little bit more focus on one in particular, and they grow up in this town in North Carolina, I think, where everyone is African American, but they kind of breed to be as light-skinned as possible. And the twins end up leaving, they run away, and the one ends up marrying a much darker skinned person and has a dark baby, and then the other marries a white guy and is actually passing for white. And this is set from the 1950s to the 1990s, and I did find it very, very interesting, and I just liked the overall storytelling. I did think the author could have dug a little bit deeper, and the ending felt a little bit abrupt to me. It was nearly at that 5-star mark, but just a few things I thought could have been done a little bit better, so that's why I did give it 4.5 stars, but I would highly recommend. And now we have a book that I honestly struggled a lot to get through. I picked it up, started it, picked up another book and read that one. Picked this one up, read a little bit more, picked up another one and read that one. I don't really know why, I just was like really struggling to read this. And that is A Far Wilder Magic by Alison Soft or Saft. I liked the idea of this one. In the blurb, it talks a lot about this hunt that this guy and this girl are gonna team up, and there's like this big prize at the end. But that was such a short part of the book, honestly. There was a lot of build up to that, but I was expecting this to be a lot more adventure, action-packed. I did like the fantastical elements to this story, but overall, it was just not really what I was expecting. It was a lot slower than I thought it was gonna be, and I was disappointed that the actual hunt part of this story was maybe like 5 pages. It was pretty heavy on the romance. It wasn't too graphic or anything, but just know that I was expecting more adventure, a little bit more romance. This was a hard one for me to rate because I did like the world, but I just didn't necessarily love the story. But ultimately, this one did end up getting 3.5 stars. But then last and least, in terms of book pages, we have Galatea, but this is by Madeline Miller, who wrote The Song of Achilles. And this, as you can see, is just a short story. It took me 20 minutes to read, maybe 15 minutes. Not even a lot of words on each page. But it's hard to write a good short story, I think, and I did think that this was very well done. I would probably just go ahead and read this at like Barnes & Noble or your library. I wouldn't recommend buying it unless you're like massively into this author. But I think I only got this for like $3 on Book Outlet, so I wasn't too mad. But I did think that the story was interesting, and it is based off of a Greek myth, as everything that Madeline Miller writes is. I think she has a PhD in mythology, but it says in ancient Greece, the marble sculpture of a beautiful woman, Galatea, is given the blessing of life. Her sculptor marries her and they have a daughter together, but the sculptor is controlling and jealous. In a desperate bid to control her, he locks Galatea away and keeps her under constant supervision. But she yearns for independence and she has a daughter to rescue. So even though this is a pretty short story, there's a lot packed into it, and I feel like Madeline Miller is just very strong with character development, and I felt like I really got to know the character even though it was a short story. So as I was going through that, there were more books in the 3 rating category than I remembered, but I feel like I did read a lot of books that are still with me that I really loved that I'll probably read again. And that's how it goes, you know, you read mostly books that you like, didn't love, and then when you read those ones that you really love, they do stand out. But do let me know if you've read any of these ones that I've talked about. Let me know if you're gonna add any to your list. But if you like this video, please make sure to give me a big thumbs up and subscribe. It really does help my channel out a lot. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!